Many Tory ministers and MPs are having a lot of trouble using the phrases Islamophobia, anti-Muslim prejudice, and even racism to describe recent comments by Lee Anderson.
Were they Islamophobic?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged. They were unacceptable.
You say it was wrong. Was it racist?
Well, it was wrong, and I'm not going to get into arguing about the rights and wrongs of what he said. It was wrong. In my book, wrong is a strong word.
Is it Islamophobic?
I'm not going to get into a definition of what is and isn't. I think it's problematic, and I think we need further clarity on it.
Problematic. This is clearly the line coming from Downing Street for ministers to follow in an attempt to steer Sunak safely between the racist wing of his party and its liberal wing. But nobody's buying it, which is why this happened when illegal migration minister Michael Tomlinson appeared on LBC with Nick Ferrari.
Why was it necessary for Lee Anderson to have the whip suspended? Where was the tolerance there?
Well, Nick, respectfully, I think what Lee said was wrong.
Yes.
And as a result of what he said, he had the whip removed from him. That's robust.
What was it
action.
specifically that meant the whip had to go? We agree it was wrong, but why was it wrong?
Nick, it was wrong. What Lee
but why
said,
was it wrong?
What he said was wrong. As a result of what he said, the whip was removed from him. That was robust action.
No,
that was
why
robust
was it
action
wrong?
that was
That's
taken.
what I'm trying to get at.
It was wrong, Nick, because of what he said, and robust action was taken as a result.
You're well-educated. Let's try this a different way. Was it Islamophobic?
What he said was wrong, and robust action was taken, and the whip was removed within 24 hours.
Minister, was it Islamophobic?
Nick, it was wrong.
Minister, I'm going to, and I'm normally a very polite man, I'm actually going to effectively put the fact, I'll ask you now for the third time, I've asked you 6 times why it was necessary. For the third time, was it Islamophobic?
Nick, it was wrong.
I'll have to curtail the interview there. I'm grateful for your time, but enough already. Michael Tomlinson is the Minister of State for Illegal Migration, unable to answer a question.
Isn't it funny? When Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party were being accused of anti-Semitism, every Conservative MP had a PhD in anti-Semitism. Oh, this is a trope. It goes back to 1931 or 1846, or there's this academic, this professor, this august American institution said that. Will Jeremy Corbyn apologise? When he's being questioned on whether one of his colleagues said something racist, a very easy word we all understand, he can't say it. He can't say it. Similarly to everything you've just heard, Sunak justified Anderson's suspension by also initially calling his words wrong and unacceptable, without saying exactly why they were wrong and unacceptable. After being criticised for that vagueness, the government has now come up with a better explanation. Earlier today, they said Anderson was wrong to conflate all Muslims with Islamists. Only took 4 days. Mike, what did you make of that clip, and why is Sunak's government struggling with this whole story, even after suspending Mr. Anderson?
I think it's partly because how the governments have treated pro-Palestine protesters in the first place. We have to remember that Lee Anderson's actually responding to an article that's written by Suella Braverman in The Telegraph, where she frames essentially pro-Palestine protesters as Islamists who have taken over the streets of London, and they're going to lead to the ghettoization of the UK. Those are her exact words in The Telegraph. So because the leading members of the government have essentially frowned upon these protesters, Sunak included, by the way, that's why the government can't go full out and be like, well, actually, Lee Anderson is an Islamophobe and he needs to be condemned completely. It's like, well, those comments weren't acceptable, but we're not going to label him as Islamophobe, partly because they have the same critiques of pro-Palestine protesters as well. Right? So they think these are mobs in the streets of London and all over the country who are coming together to incite hatred, to incite violence. And what's really frustrating about this is whenever ethnic minorities have a cause they care deeply about, they're framed as a problem. So we saw this in 2020 when people took to the streets about Black Lives Matter, and campaigned ferociously across the country for an end to racial injustice. What happened in that scenario was that Black people and people who protested were framed as attacking British values, being ungrateful, moaning too much, people saying we're being overly woke, etc. You fast forward to 4 years where people are deeply concerned with the plight of Palestinians and the war on Gaza. And these people have been framed as kind of Islamist, violent mobs. These protests have been largely peaceful. I've been to quite a few of them, been largely peaceful. Nothing terrible that's happened in many of these protests. These are people who deeply care about the situation in Gaza. So the government can't go too hard on Lee Anderson because they share some of his sentiments. Ideally, the government don't want to see us protesting about Palestine. They don't want to see people voicing this kind of passionate frustration about what's going on there. That's the general context, I think, which is why the government can't be too hard on Lee Anderson, because this is rhetoric that the governments have also espoused themselves.
Important to say as well, my colleague Michael Walker said this last night, we have had demonstration after demonstration in London for months, hundreds, millions of people over all of these, of course, cumulatively, millions of people. We've had no altercations with the police. We've had no really profound property damage. I mean, get some graffiti or whatever, somebody might tag something, but nothing like March 26th in 2011 or the student protests in 2010. And yet these protests, by any measure, incredibly peaceful, by any measure, are somehow being painted as a threat to democracy itself. You have to ask why. Why? Well, I think it's inarguably because many working class people from minority backgrounds are on it. And if they're appealing to their religious values, so what? Christians can do that. Among all this, Conservative peer Saida Warsi has detected a pattern. Here's what she said on Channel 4 News.
I'm really concerned that the Prime Minister is so reluctant to call out Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism when it's so obvious.
What does it reveal about your party?
I think I'm just really concerned as to whether or not this is somehow an electoral strategy or whether it's just personal prejudice amongst my colleagues. But either way, whatever it is, it has to be resolved. It has to be dealt with. We cannot have a community of over 4 million being stigmatized and stereotyped and targeted in this way. As the Prime Minister said today, that we have a responsibility as parliamentarians to create a sense of ease, to not ratchet this up. But all I'm seeing is so many of my colleagues using the language of hate, using the language of division and pitting community against community. And if the Prime Minister genuinely believes that the job of parliamentarians is not to do that, then he needs to speak to his colleagues and ask them to stop.
A Tory lord there saying how colleagues are using, quote, the language of hate. Krishnan Guru Murthy went on to ask Warsi about the effectiveness of hatred as an electoral strategy.
Theresa May once warned the party about being the nasty party. I mean, is this now looking like not just nasty, but racist, Islamophobic, hateful party?
It breaks my heart to see my party being so toxic in this way. It breaks my heart to see them really reflecting the awful populist post-truth politics of the United States. And it breaks my heart to think that they believe, or colleagues believe, that, projecting as somehow rabid racist is what's going to win them votes at the next election. The things that are going to win us votes at the next election is explaining what kind of program we have for the United Kingdom. What we're going to do with the economy, how we're going to improve healthcare, how we're going to make sure people can go to hospital and get treated on time, how our schools are going to be not crumbling. These are how inflation is going to be under control, how people are going to be able to afford to buy a house. And because unfortunately we don't have the answers to these big questions, we've chosen to fight culture wars. It's got to stop.
Saida Warsi. This is a Tory peer, Tory baroness, Saida Warsi. You sound like Ash Sarkar on Novara Media. Politicians no longer even want to address the big problems. They focus on this stuff instead. So true. By the way, and I have to finish with this, Lee Anderson is saying that London is controlled by Islamists while posting a tweeted picture of drinking a pint on a Sunday evening in London. I don't understand these people. It's Schrodinger's mare with Sadiq Khan. On the one hand, he's ultra-identity politics, Mr. LGBT rights. We can have, trans performers reading stories to kids in libraries. And at the same time, he's controlled by Islamists, religious fundamentalists, who want to turn back the clock 1,000 years. What is it? Because I'm pretty sure 1,000 years ago, we didn't have drag story time. Maybe in the little world of Lee Anderson,